A great day it is, and good to have you join us for the Reporters Roundtable, where we discuss issues from all angles and from all sides. And today we are looking at Ghana's debt sustainability plan. And we know that Ghana has begun restructuring its debt by rolling out a plan to swap $10.5 billion in local bonds with new ones, seeking IMF help, and has prepared a proposal to restructure its foreign debt as the country struggles to sustain its economy. But why do we need to restructure? What are the implications for businesses and the country at large? You join us on this platform as we discuss the issues from all angles and from all sides. And on this platform, you can also send in your text or your WhatsApp on 0244-745152. 0244-745152. You can also join us online at gbcghana.com as we roll the program live on our Facebook platform. Do like the page, share it, and send in your comments and your suggestions, and we'll have them right here in studio, and we'll love to read your comments. And in studio to help us do this is the head of current affairs of ETV Ghana and Happy FM, Mr. Samuel Eshen. Sammy?
Hi.
It's been long.
It's been long, and it's good to be back here.
Great to have you on.
Happy New Year to you, and you're doing a great job.
Thank you. Same with you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right. With Sammy Eshen in the studio is Dr. Ebenezer Ashley, and Dr. Ebenezer Ashley is the executive head of research, media, business intelligence, and market conduct at the Ghana Association of Banks. He's a financial expert as well, and he has also stayed away for long, and we managed to pull him in. Dr. Ashley.
Yes.
Great to have you back on set.
And it's also a pleasure to be with you after a very long while. You've moderated your submission on air, and that's very good. Yes, it's been a long while, and it's also a joy to see one of the technocrats in the studio. After several years of living the campus, yes, and so in the person of submission, we were at tech together.
Oh wow!
Yes,
wow.
It is good to be back.
A fine gentleman with great brains.
Yes, yeah.
Right, so you join us on this platform. We'll be back shortly. Thank you for staying on. And within the week, we know a lot of things happened in terms of news, and we would want you to just watch snippets of what had happened within the week. We're looking at Ghana's debt sustainability plan, and usually for these conversations you want to hear from the expert, but you know what I want to do? Let me hear from the journalists what your understanding of this whole debt restructuring is all about.
It's interesting that we're starting the conversation, and I have some tea in front of me, because yesterday I was all over social media that an economist has made the statement that if you earn below 2,000 Ghana cedis, don't be drinking tea.
Bread and eggs.
Yes. So that's on a lighter note. But I think that we have been following this conversation for a long time now, and the economist will tell you that this was coming. If you read the IMF Article 4 report, they had already started giving us indications as to where we're headed as a nation when it comes to the management of our debt portfolio, and that if we're not careful, we're going to get to a situation whereby it was going to be unsustainable. And so if you read the reports from 2020, 2021, and then into 2022, they indicate how COVID-19 has impacted on our economy, the Russia-Ukraine war has impacted on our economy, but they also highlight the possibility that we'll get into this situation where we are in. And I would want, as much as possible, to try and simplify the conversation for our viewers as to what this whole debt sustainability conversation is about. So whilst we speak now, our debt portfolio as a nation is over 400 billion. As we speak now, that's how much we owe as a nation. Now, where is this indebtedness coming from? So every year, the government puts out a budget. In this budget, and I'll use the 2022 budget as an example. In the 2022 budget, the government had indicated that it was going to expect to rake in revenue of over 100 billion. And then it had projected that it was going to spend 137 billion within 2022. So if you look at 100 billion and then 137 billion, it tells you that there is a deficit of 37 billion. So if the government makes its revenue of 100 billion and then it spends that 100 billion, that 37 billion which is on top of it, where is that money coming from? Because it's not money that is being generated internally. So then government decides to now look for that 37 billion. And then it goes to the bond market. Now, the bond market is where government goes to tell the people that, look, I need this money. Are you able to give me this money? So there are individuals who would say that, let's say I have $10 billion that I want to give to the government of Ghana. But I want to give it to the government of Ghana at a certain coupon rate. What's that coupon rate? Is the interest rate that he's saying that, okay, if I give you 10 billion, I'm expecting to get, let's say, 10%, 9% interest rate. The government says there's a negotiation. Government says I can give you 7%. This one says I can give you 8%, and then they arrive at a conclusion. That's the coupon rate. So the person gives the government the money, and then because a bond is a long-term, financial instrument, government knows that it has maybe 6 years. It's about 10 years to pay the interest components that it has to pay them. Now, it is that money which we have gone to collect from the investors, be it locally or internationally, and I'll explain the local aspect as well, be it locally or internationally, which we are struggling with. Because the government looks at its books and realizes that, look, the instruments that are maturing, let's say in the next 4 years, with the state of affairs of our economy, we are unable to meet them. We are unable to fulfill them. Now, how do we go about resolving it? You meet the people and have a conversation with them. I'm expected to pay you, let's say this year, this interest of, let's say, 2 billion. But I'm unable to pay this interest of 2 billion. And so I'm hoping that if you agree with me, we would postpone the payment or defer the payment to, let's say, 2024. And then in 2024, because I don't have the money to pay you, I expect that in 2024, maybe I'll give you 5% of that 8%, which we agreed on. But unfortunately, that is not what we have done. The government makes an announcement, and there are two announcements that have been made, one for the local market and then one for the external market. The external market, government decides and says that we suspended it. We are not paying anything. But for the local market, government says that, look, for those of you that you have bonds, we are saying that in 2023, all bonds that are maturing would earn no interest, zero. Those that will enter into 2024, we are giving 5%. The person who gave you that money was expecting to make some money from that investment he has given you, that money he has given you. And so government is now saying that if you have, I owe you, 2023 this year, I am unable to pay that money. That is what this whole debt restructuring is about. Government hasn't got the money to pay people that it's borrowed money from. And so we have to try and restructure that money. Then it segregates them and says that some are exempted and some are not exempted. And if you remember, immediately after the announcement by the finance minister, you saw the trade unions coming together. The bankers were there. No, the bankers have not been there so far. It's been the teachers, it's been the TUC, it's been the Ghana Medical Association, and then the nurses and midwives, and all of them. They came together and they said, look, if government decides not to pay this interest component to, let's say, our pension fund, we are in trouble because they have their fund managers who are using their money as an investment with government, expecting that that interest will be paid to them. So that, let's say, 100 people go on pension today. The pension fund is expecting that money from the government of Ghana in order to meet its commitment to the people that are going on pension. But the government puts a caveat and says that we are going to set up a stability fund. As we speak now, we are told that it's about 15 billion, which has been committed to the stability fund. As to where the money is coming from for the stability fund, as to how is being disbursed. This was to give assurances to the insurance companies. It was to give assurance to the banks. It was to give assurance to other players in the industry that the government knew that it was going to impact heavily on them. Just yesterday or 2 days ago, we read in the papers that 60% of banks in this country are in trouble because of this whole arrangement that is being done. And so I will make other submissions on this matter, but I wanted to simplify the whole conversation about the debt restructuring for our viewers to follow us, and then later on, some nitty-gritties of it will highlight them. So basically, that's the debt restructuring.
Are you on the same page with the explanation my journalist friend has given?
Thank you very much. First, I will say good morning to your cherished viewers. It's been a while. Yes, he has made a good submission, but a little clarification with regards to the figures. He mentioned 400 billion being the country's debt. Mentioned 100 billion being targeted revenue for 2022.
Yeah.
And then 137 billion being the targeted expenditure for 2022. These figures are not wrong. But then there was an example of going into the market to borrow, say, $10 billion. Now, if you mentioned $10 billion, you mentioned 400 billion, you mentioned 100 billion, you mentioned 137 billion, without specifying the currency. Our viewers might think you were estimating the country's debt in dollars, because the last example you were specific in terms of currency denomination. So, for the benefit of our viewers, I'm sure he was alluding to the fact that the debt was totaling about 400 billion Ghana cedis. And then the targeted revenue for last year was 100 billion Ghana cedis. That's against targeted expenditure of 137 billion Ghana cedis. That's just a little. And then his explanation on the public sentiments and various bodies, approaching the finance minister or ministry for some redress, but not sure of banks coming in. He was very quick to say they are not, because perhaps in the public domain he has not heard, which is rightly so.
Are you a part of it?
Well,
are you a part of it?
You just read the introduction, so the banks have also taken initiative, but it is not in the public domain. Yes, because they hold public funds. The depositors are people within the economy, some nationals, some non-nationals, and therefore it is up to them to ensure that as custodians of individuals and corporate funds, we fight for their common cause. So the banks, even as at Wednesday, were even on this particular course. And so much is going on, but it is not intended
is there
for
a public statement to that effect?
No, there is no need for public statement.
That's why I exempted the banks.
No, so you are right. I'm saying, you saying the banks, you've not heard anything, you are right, because there's nothing within the public domain. But what I'm trying to say is that the fact that there are no public statements to that effect does not mean the banks are accepting the situation as it is and getting along with it. They're fighting to ensure that they effectively represent the views of depositors. That's how I mean by that. Now, with the depositors situation resolved, I think the debt in itself, he has talked about the debt, talked about the restructuring. When it comes to the restructuring, first he mentioned the reason why the government might not be able to pay. The debt is due.
But let me get your
explanation,
your own
version of it.
Yes, your version of it, and why the need for the restructuring.
Okay.
Yes, at this time.
Very good, very good. And then that is very good. Yes, actually, the debt, we have two components of the debt. The external amount borrowed by the country, and then the internal, which has to do with the financial institutions and some individuals. All of them even pass through various financial institutions within the country to get access to the government for lending and for government to borrow. Now, over time, the debt becomes piled up and its payment becomes a challenge. Now, for last year, I remember through discussions, some drew my attention to the fact that there have been public proclamation by the finance ministry that we will not go to the IMF. It was not made perhaps out of mischief, but it was based on the economic conditions at that time and the hope that as people will be able to effectively steer the affairs of the country, manage the resources to the expected destination. That was it. But there are unforeseen contingencies in every economic sphere of life. and this can, in a way, hit you at any point along the journey. Now, from September, October, November, you realize the cedi fell in value relative to the dollar because at the point in time it was about 15 cedis to $1. Now, what has happened over the years, in time past, when you go in for the borrowing money from lenders, you keep it on your books and the amount is maintained. And therefore, even if it takes 20 years to pay, you pay the same amount. Over time, our investors have also become innovative and realized that particular strategy is not helping to grow their funds when they invest. And so they've also moved the paradigm to the current dispensation, which has to do with determining the value of their debt indexed to a particular currency. So that even if you want to maintain the same amount, having confidence in the strength of that currency will make sure that the total amount lent to you wouldn't diminish when it comes to a repayment date. And so many investors have found respite in the currency called United States dollar or the American dollar. Then you index it to it. And so this is what happened between September, October, November. If Ghana's debt was about 400 billion Ghana cedis at that time, it was up to the regulator, that's the Bank of Ghana, that effectively manages the funds of the country to ensure that at the end of every month, all right, how much do we owe our lenders? How much is it? Is it in dollar denomination? If it is, then you have to determine the value of the debt at the prevailing market price. So if you contacted the lender and contracted the loan when it was about 8 cedis to $1, and you are now having to exchange 15 cedis to $1, the same amount of dollars you borrowed, let's say the 10 billion, let's use this analysis, 10 billion dollars still remain on the books. However, as at that time, you might need about 80 billion Ghana cedis to pay that same debt. Now, if you need 15 cedis to buy $1, then the same debt you've not added even a penny, let alone add $1 to the $10 billion on the books. However, you would need about 150 billion Ghana cedis to pay the same 10 billion. So you realize, in effect, you've added 70 billion Ghana cedis to the debt.
Because the economic situation has shifted.
That's what it is. Without adding physical 1 penny or $1 to the debt for any infrastructural facilities in the country. So this is the reality that we are faced with as a nation. The strength of our currency determines the extent to which we are able to apply the necessary brakes to our debt. That's what it is. So chunk of the debt as we have now is not as a result of the country borrowing, but it's as a result of our inability to maintain the strength of our currency, apply the necessary brakes on the currency volatility so that we could heave a sigh of relief and ensure that over time we could still say that the $10 billion that we contracted is still equivalent to 80 billion Ghana cedis or just 90 billion Ghana cedis. That is the issue we have at hand as a nation. And that's why the debt is skyrocketing. Now, with little explanation with regards to the difference.
But I think that the point about the build-up in terms of the depreciation of the cedi, some clarity has to be brought into the conversation because you see, the 400 billion Ghana cedis we are talking about, it's not the 2023 figure we are talking about. We are referencing
let me explain.
2022.
No,
and this was the last quarter of the year, 2022.
Let him make the interjection.
So I think that we should
quickly.
clarify that thing so that we don't confuse our viewers. That debt alone, on its own, sitting on its own without the cedi depreciation, was of a concern already. Aside the cedi depreciating for us to now look for extra money to top up before we can make our commitment, fulfill our commitments to our lenders. Do you get the point? So I owe you 10 billion. It's an outstanding debt that is there. But as a result of my cedi depreciating, now that 10 billion is become, let's say, 11.5 billion. But that 10 billion, already its payment was going to be a headache. I think we need to clarify that point.
Let me.
Is that it?
Yes, that's what it is.
Okay. No. Let me explain. That's where I was heading to. If he had bid a little bit of time, he would have understood. Looking at the difference between the 10 billion revenue expectation and then the 137 billion
100
expenditure.
billion.
The 100 billion Ghana cedi revenue expectation, that's against 137 billion expenditure. Now here you realize the expenditure is in excess of 37 billion. I'm trying to address, if you had bid your time, you realize we're on the same page. But then you understand why sometimes the debts are unpayable and they pile up. So you realize you have projection of raking in 100 billion Ghana cedis as against expending 137 billion. The difference, to ensure that you are able to carry out the targeted or planned expenditure projects for the year, will require that you borrow. Why do you go into borrow? You don't just go into borrow out of the blue. You borrow based on future expectation that we could get funds from sources A, B, C, D to make up for it at a later date. So the country does not borrow just because you want to borrow for borrowing's sake. Even before the lender lends to you, he or she would require some documentation to indicate how you intend to pay at the maturity date. So there are some resources or there are some planned activities, economic activities that the country would have to provide as justification for earning that particular funds for the intended project at that particular point in time. So all our debts are contracted with anticipated repayments, except that when the projected or the strategic way of repaying the debt does not materialize, then it becomes a challenge to you with regards to the payment. And all I'm saying here is, besides having well-planned strategy to pay the debt, to pile it up, as I said, you might have taken this in place, but you are unable to pay. As a result of this, your debt has piled up to 400 billion Ghana cedis. You are contending with. But let's also be clear on this. Not all the 400 billion Ghana cedis was due for payment last year. Part is due, not all at all. Indeed. It's just part that is due for payment. Others are for this year, the following year, and about 10, 20 years even to come. If you look at it, around 2018-19, we contracted the longest maturity debt in Africa, which is 31-year bond. Nigeria went in for 30-year bond. Ghana was able to surpass it to 31-year bond. So we have debts that have been contracted, but the payments...
So how much is due for payment as at now?
If you look at the domestic, that's the estimation he mentioned. That is the total amount that the government expects, all right, to be able to renegotiate so that the repayment will be postponed to another date.
Okay.
You get the point.
Okay.
So here, if you have, let's say, you mentioned, let's look at the dollar denomination in this particular context to suit the expected amount to be renegotiated by the government. If you're talking about even $15 billion, all right, which will translate into a little closer to 140 billion Ghana cedis as we speak. This is the amount that you are contending with to pay out of, say, 400 billion Ghana cedis. So it is less than half of it that you are focused on. But there are others that would also recur or mature at a later date. The bottom line is this. Some of us have worked extensively on debt and therefore have concluded that if you look at other countries, the reason I'm dwelling on this is that if you look at the narratives in other countries, the debt in itself is not an issue. It is the ability of the managers of the economy to use the debt for the purposes intended so that the planned strategic way of repaying the debt at maturity date will not be failed and the debt wouldn't become a challenge to subsequent generations. So these are the issues that normally come with his submission, which we are not able to find, especially in African terrain, and therefore makes the argument against piling up of debt
that is where I was coming to, and I'll bring Sami also in, because you spoke about other sources. You made mention of the fact that we don't just borrow for borrowing's sake.
No.
Because even though you had touched on the cedi depreciating and affecting what we needed to even give out,
yes,
you touched on sources.
yes.
So before we borrow, or before we go in for those monies, we know we have sources A, B, C, and D that we will have planned, or strategically we are going to pay our debt.
Rely on to pay at the maturity date. At
the maturity date.
Yes.
But let me ask you, what has happened to those sources?
Yes.
And why is everybody, as though bodies, associations, individuals, it seems everybody is on the edge about this whole restructuring business?
Thank you very much.
Bring us to speed to it so that I'll bring my journalist friend quickly, because you've been talking for a while now.
Thank you very much. That is the issue that requires redress. That is the fact. Everyone is on the edge because we are in a democratic dispensation where elections are held, people are voted into office. The expectation is that you'll be able to effectively steer the affairs of the economy so that the issue of debt would be more or less minimized, if not a thing of the past, to the extent that funds of individuals and corporate bodies wouldn't be affected, such as we find ourselves in. That's why everyone will be on the edge. Now, how did we come to this stage? That's, if I understood your question to some extent. We have economic challenges. Yes, the global financial crisis, the civil war in, should I call it a civil war? There's a clear, a full-fledged war between Russia and Ukraine in this particular situation. All of these are affecting our economic activities. I'm sure we'll have the opportunity to talk about directly. It has an implication for Ghana's trade relations with Russia and Ukraine in this particular regard. Now, Ghana's problem has to do with the fact that we are still import-led. We are import-driven and not export-oriented. That is the challenge we have as a nation. And that is why at a point in time it becomes difficult for us to apply the necessary brakes on the free fall of the local currency. Our importation is too high as we speak, and that is why we have a challenge. It is good within the 2023 budget as presented by the finance minister in November. The Bank of Ghana has stated clearly some of the practical measures that the country intends to embark on to ensure that we are able to address this challenge. One has to do with the decision to cease forthwith from providing funds, the forex, for importation of certain items into the country, such as poultry, the rice. We're also looking at cement
and oil.
And oil. You know, these are the key variables that actually affect the way we are able to manage and control our currency. The issue we find ourselves in, to a very large extent, has to do with our excessive importation of these items. Now, rice has proven to be the staple food throughout the African countries. Ghana is no exception. So the demand is on the increase. Now, we also attest to the fact that our population increase far outweighs the mortality rate we have in the country, which means we have more mouths to feed than those that we have to lay to rest. And demand is always on the increase. How do we produce to meet this local demand? You know, rice, sugar, and importation alone was quoted in excess of $10 billion into the country in recent period. That is not proper for us. It is not helping. So there's too much pressure on our local currency with regards to importation of items into the country. And that actually makes it difficult at a point in time for any manager of the economy to be able to have firm grip over the exchange rates in the system. Also, we are not able to ensure that we have effective control over what I've always termed as destination-specific currency transaction. Now, once again, destination-specific currency transaction. If we have businessmen and women, until we are able to make sure we effectively control the production aspect, for those that go out, most of the countries that produce the things we need do not utilize dollar as their local currency. Again, most of the countries that Ghanaian businessmen and women travel to buy items into the country do not use dollar as their local currency. They have their specific currencies. But everybody going outside the country quickly rush in for the dollar. And the dollar is not something we can print. We acquire it through transactions. And therefore, if the demand is in far excess of the availability which is supply, then we find ourselves in a very difficult situation. Over the past 7-8 years, China has proven to be the leading trading partner for not just Ghana, but then the African continent. China has overtaken US, UK, Germany, all other countries with regards to trading with individual African countries. And when you enter the four walls of China, China is bordered by over 17 countries in the world because of its size. If you enter the four walls of China, the moment you arrive, if you have dollar, you have cedi, whichever currency, you have to convert it into the Chinese renminbi before you buy anything in the country. And so, as we speak, with the exception of US, China remains the most, the country with the highest dollar reserve in the world, with the exception of US. You know, so how is this impacting on our economy? If everyone goes in to exchange the dollar, then there is what? There's challenge to our currency. If you look at it, it is the dollar that dominates in terms of volatility of our currency. And that is where we have an issue. And the step taken by a Bank of Ghana, I'm sure this would also follow very soon, because it is not something that will require so much
Are we reaping the benefits, in your estimation, of the strategy that the Bank of Ghana has put out in helping stabilize our economy now and finding a way of doing away with our debts?
I have always insisted that the approach that the Bank of Ghana is using is counterproductive.
Why so?
Yeah, because I think that they are using the textbook approach in trying to address the issue of the performance of the city. And all this conversation we are having is about policy. All this conversation, the talk is about policy direction of the government. For instance, so the government decides that monetary policy rate is going to fix it at 27.5%. I don't know how it's gone now, but at the last time I remember, it was around 27.5%. Now, what does the monetary policy rate necessarily do? It's how much the bank is going to lend to you when you're going to borrow money from the bank. So you go to the bank has a policy rate of 27.5%. You may end up taking a loan from the bank and paying, let's say, 30%, 31%, 34%. It's a disincentive for me as a businessman to go to the bank to want to go and borrow money from there, because the interest rate is killer. Do you understand? So if I am unable to go to the bank to go and borrow money from the bank, what would it mean? It would mean that first, my ability to expand is a problem. If I'm able to expand, it would mean that I would be able to bring in a lot more goods. It would mean that I'd be able to create a lot more jobs and employ a lot more people, which also becomes a revenue outlet for government, because these are taxes that we are talking about. Now, since Eben is here, the macroeconomic indicators and its translation into the micro has always been a matter that is in contention when it comes to economies in the world, as to why the macro does not necessarily translate into the micro. As we speak now, we're told that the cedi is now gaining strength against the cedi. Just a few weeks ago, against the dollar, sorry. Yeah. It was 8 point something. Yeah. Now it's around 9. That's the Bank of Ghana's rate that has been given us. But if you go to the market, they tell you it's 12 and co. Is it translating in terms of the performance of the economy? Inflation, the statistical service made us know, is around 54 point something now. 54.1 for December. For December. So is it translating into how the economy is doing? No, it's not. Because it's galloping. Inflation is galloping. The government has taken the decision that, look, we are going to withdraw the benchmark value, which it was previously given importers and exporters. What does that mean? If I go and import, let's say, goods from China or from the US and I bring it into the country, it means that I'm going to pay full cost of the goods I'm bringing into the country. As a businessman, when I bring it into the country, what I'm going to do is going to transfer the cost of the taxes I'm paying at the port. Initially, they were enjoying some 30% and 10%. But now, that 30%, that 10% is going to be added to the cost of the product I'm bringing into the country. What does it do? Automatically, it increases the prices of the goods on the market. And so inflation again gallops. So yes, you're trying to control how the macro operates with the adjustment of the monetary policy rate. But truly, is it reflecting on the ground? The Statistical Service makes us to understand that the inflation we're experiencing in this country is basically food-driven inflation. What is accounting for the food drive or driven inflation in this country? They would say the cost of transporting the goods. They would add other factors, the taxes and co. What are the measures, the steps that are being taken to ensure that these things don't jump so as it in the end reverses the steps that government is taking?
Sami, let me announce the phone because I can see people have started and they want to join in the conversation. So I'll give you the opportunity to conclude.
To run up.
Those. Okay. Yes, but let me announce the phone is 0244 745152. Kindly send a text message. Please, you can't call the number, so kindly send a text message or a WhatsApp message. I know you're following keenly on the discussions hearing, but I will entreat you that let's hear you. Send a text message or a WhatsApp on the number displayed on your screen and we'll be glad. More importantly, you can add your name and where you're also reaching us from because we do value those as well. And let the language be civil because this is a national platform. Thank you. Right. I mean,
all right, so
yeah.
I think that I would want to bring us home, back to the conversation about the debt restructuring program. And I say that this whole process of debt restructuring could have been properly handled. He mentioned that the bankers are talking behind the scenes. Yes, I know they are talking behind the scenes because it's going to heavily impact on them. The insurance companies are speaking because just 2 days ago, the finance ministry had no option than to issue a statement emphasizing that they are not going to exempt them. So virtually all the affected industries are seeking to be exempted from it. Now, if we have a situation where even just the individual bondholders have decided that they are going to court to ensure that their bonds, if they decide not to exchange their current bonds with the ones that are being offered by the, the Bank of Ghana or the government for that matter, they are going to court about it. Because we know that there's been, I think, a thrice of a postponement of the deadline for the exchange of the deadline. As we speak now, I think it's on the 16th. 16th January. So by 16th of January, I've heard already people asking the finance ministry to postpone the date for the 16th of January because they know that that deadline might not be met. If it's not met, it has consequences as well for our IMF agreement we want to sign on to. Because the IMF has indicated that until we are able to prove, regardless of the fact that we have gotten a staff level agreement with them, until we are able to prove that we have a means to sustain our debt, there is no way we are going to have the executive approval of that arrangement we're seeking with the IMF. And so it's a very, very dicey situation that we find ourselves in. Let's not lose sight of the fact that the actions of the Bretton Woods institutions, the rating agencies as well, are affecting the Ghanaian economy as well. We have been downgraded virtually by all of them, S&P, Moody's, all of them, Fitch, to a junk status. And this is impacting heavily on us because nobody then trusts our government to want to do business. Investors who would want to come into this country don't want to come. And so it's imperative that we are able to agree with the IMF so that they know that there is a master hand that is going to whip us into a proper position to ensure that their investments, if they are here, and their payments obligations are going to be met. And so I think that the government of Ghana, as per even the advice that the Attorney General gave the finance minister, and this is public document which is out there, that the approach that the finance minister is using for this debt restructuring program, the state attorney advised against the approach that the finance minister is using, and that the state attorney had advised that the finance minister should have gone the approach of consultation, the approach of dialogue, and not the approach of seemingly telling people that this is a voluntary action and yet it's compulsory. And so I think that the days ahead of us will let us know how the finance ministry is going to handle itself when it comes to this debt restructuring program. If the finance ministry makes a decision or takes a decision to extend the deadline from the 16th to any other date, then there's trouble. If there's an extension, then there's trouble. Remember, yesterday His Excellency the President said that he is hoping that by February would have concluded the IMF deal. I hope so. But if there is an extension again, then there's trouble. Yeah.
I'll come back to you to find out why the trouble.
Yeah.
So you explain further. But Dr. Ashley, hold on a bit for me. Let me take this message from Bright Dake from Dowenya. And Bright says, please, I want to understand something. Per what was just explained right now by Dr. Ashley, if this problem we are facing currently is due to the dollar rate, then my question is, who fixes the dollar rate? Is it the BOG? Can BOG, that is the Bank of Ghana, deal with U.S. Central Bank directly for the dollar supply on our rates? Can we continue using the dollar as our currency, just as he said that other countries do not use the dollar as their local currency? What can be done? These are 3 in 1 question coming from Bright Dake from Dowenya, and I'm sure Dr. Ashley will answer them. Doc, please take note of them. Let me take this one. Togbi Dompre says, let me ask you people, why is it that Mr. President wouldn't rather take the parliamentary candidate as Gracia? Rather, yes, rather, and he is interested in SNET. Okay, Togbi Dompre, Togbi, okay, your question is well noted, and it will be handled.
But that has been exempted anyway.
Oh, that has been exempted.
It's yes.
So
your TUC fought for.
Okay, so that's it for you. It has been exempted, so that is it, and we're looking forward to getting the answers for Bright Dake, and I'm sure Dr. Ashley will answer them. But let me take some other message, because usually we shortchange them, you know. we give more time to our studio panel, and we leave our viewers. And please, why should government collapse GN banks that was employing over 1,000+ workers when government cannot employ such people? Are there any reasons? Please add your name and where you are reaching us from. I'll be very much grateful. Why GM Bank collapse or closure when it was employing over 1,000 people and government is not absorbing those people? Hi, please, I'm Ranko from Accra, Spintus Flower Port Junction. Please, I really want to understand something. I want to know how much is the dollar rate now. Okay. All right, so if you can send in your WhatsApp message and also your text message as well, and we'll receive them. Kindly send a text or a WhatsApp. We have some questions in here. As the conversation goes on, we'll do as well as possible to tackle all the issues that have been raised. And this one says, hi, thank you for your explanations. God bless you all. My name is Nana Mwakon from Kumasi Santase, and it's a very wonderful program. Sami has also done well. This tells us that some of our journalists are well educated and understand the issues, and he's breaking it down so easily for some of us to understand and making the work of the expert also easier in the studio. Nana Mwakon from Kumasi Santase. Nana, grateful for your comments. We expect more of those from you, because without you, the table is just an arc. It is not a circle or round. So please send in your comments, your views, and your suggestions. We'll be glad to read them. Richard says, hey, Rebecca, great show. Loving it, every bit of it. And inform the guys in the studio, superb. They are doing well. This is coming from Richard. He's a colleague in one of the media houses, but I won't review. Thank you, Richard. Thank you so much. And there are more questions coming in. I think everything starts with the mindset of Ghanaians. We need to use institutions like the NCCE and Information Service to help change our taste for foreign goods. It's time we look in for our own solution. My name is Apia Duyayao from Duyayao Nkwanta. Apia Duyayao Nkwanta. Our taste for foreign goods, he says, must be reduced, and NCC and the information services should be up in that direction. Apia, thank you. Right, so let me come back. There was a question from Dowenya.
Yeah. Who controls the dollar in
Who controls? Yes, is it the BOG? What can be done?
BOG can negotiate for more dollars. Yes, actually, the dollar is based on the interactions of the market. When, as I explained, when we demand more for goods for which they are not manufactured in the country, but will have to be brought from without, then the importers would also have their businesses blossoming, because it means import more. And as they import more, they will require more of the foreign currency to bring the goods into the country. So it is not controlled by the BOG. What BOG controls in its circulation directly is the cedi that it makes available to the various banks. Its control over the foreign currency has to do with how much the BOG has in reserve and how much the various banks and forex bureaus need for their transactions. So based on our forex strength, the country determines what ratio should go to the banks and to the forex markets to exchange for our businessmen and women.
Right.
So this is what actually happens.
And Francis Kwachi also says, what happens to the economy if we are not able to land a deal with the IMF? And I think that is coming to Sami quickly, because my time is almost up. I'll give you the chance to...
quickly. Then let me, he touched on the policy rate by the BOG, which actually reflects a book approach to management of the economy, as I said. It is book approach, but then it translates into practical in this situation. Okay. Globally, if you have economic challenges, especially with demand, and you want to control it, you want to discourage demand for money, because you have tendency to believe that the demand is not going into economic and productive ventures that will translate into productive returns, but then more into social activities with minimal direct returns, but more of psychological satisfaction. If you do not need this, then you raise the rate to discourage people from borrowing.
But in this case, it wasn't a case of more dollars in the system.
No, this one.
In this case, that's why I said it was a
because we had the
it's not a case of more dollars in the system.
No, initially, you see, there are permutations for every problem.
Please, we land in soon.
Exactly. For our viewers, for every problem, there are many strategic ways of addressing the problem, not just one. So when there is a problem, you first apply the immediate available solution to see if it works.
Let me simplify for a second.
Then you
what was this one to achieve?
A second we go.
What was this 27.5? What is it to achieve? What is it trying to cure? If you could help me with that.
That's what I'm saying. It is intended to ensure for most
to stabilize the system.
There's a specific thing.
Right,
but that's what the generality is to discourage. You see, besides the corporate bodies, individuals also going to borrow. All right, there are certain social factions that you mentioned here.
Then the answer I'm asking from you is that the monetary policy rate is adjusted either upwards or downwards to cure one thing, and that's inflation. This particular monetary policy rate adjustment upwards, consistent from last year and even the previous year, has been to ensure that we control how the inflation is galloping. That's been the ultimate. But where is inflation now? Inflation is 54.1% as we speak. So it means that the policy rate we are adjusting and adjusting.
So if it hasn't worked, what sustainable measures should we take? A second, please.
You see, I'm saying it has not worked because the challenge in itself is just as he mentioned. Unfortunately, there's no time.
So you give me one sustainable approach we should use.
He talked about one major economic challenge that people talk, but it's the reverse. He said there are people saying how the problem has to do with how macroeconomic strategy will translate and reflect in micro strategies. It's the other way around. Okay. Our microeconomic strategy, which has to do with you produce. If you produce to meet the needs of the people within the country, then the interaction in the market will be within the cedi and not the cedi against a foreign currency. In this case, it will make the macroeconomic target realistic.
Right.
No, it is not.
Give me one sustainable approach we should use.
For me,
we're coming to it. I'll give you
my time. I don't have the laxity of time. That's why I want you to make it brief.
Now, for me, the way to go is pure determination by government. If you say that you're not going to supply forex to the importers of rice, oil, and the rest of them, we should by now be seeing proactive actions to ensure that rice producers are getting support, one, from the, what was the name, Development Bank Ghana, through their agency banks, and then again, we should be seeing the Agri Development Bank being interested to support these institutions to bring in. Because you see, until as a nation, we are able to export more, to balance our trade export imbalance, we would always be here and be having this conversation.
I think this conversation would have to go back to it again. Dr. Ashley, unfortunately, my time is up.
No, quickly. With regards to what you said, within the financial industry, this problem is being addressed. And that's the basis of the BOG deciding to apply the strategy from the end.
Okay.
Because it should have been in place long ago.
All right.
So it is not book solution.
That's
This
right.
is
It's not
strategic.
Unfortunately, we don't have
strategic,
time. I would have explained to you why it's a
My name is
textbook
Rebekah
report
Awuah,
again.
and we have been looking at Ghana's debt sustainability plan, and I have been in here with Dr. Ebenezer Ashley. Dr. Ebenezer Ashley is with the Ghana Association of Banks. He is the executive head, research, media, business intelligence, and market conduct, executive head of that department. Thank you so much, Doc, for coming in. And Samuel Ishen is also the head of current affairs at ETV Ghana and Happy FM. Sammy, good to have you back. And I know this friendship is staying for quite a very long time. Oh yes, I know we have unfinished business. We will do it again. We'll do it again, God willing. Thank you, Ghana, for being a part of this program. When you say a prayer, do say one for us too. We'll see you again, God willing, next week.